something to look at when we're addressing that fawning behavior are the type of people we're talking to. Okay, paying attention. I always say paying attention is a big thing. Is sometimes people might ask us something or they might be telling us something and we just automatically agree with them and we automatically agree to do whatever it is they say. And that person might not necessarily be manipulating us. They might not be a nasty person and they don't necessarily know they're doing anything wrong because we haven't told them no. Trauma responses tend to be automatic. They're out there at the speed of light to not always a threat, but maybe a perceived threat. And they could be threats that were learned in our past, in situations and different relationships and so on. And those trauma responses, they're there to protect us. Over time, if it's like our default setting, they can become quite maladaptive. Just a quick recap, I guess, over the main kind of trauma responses. You're looking at fight, flight, freeze, fawn. There are some other ones, but they would be the four Fs, if you will, the main ones. And just to give you an idea that these, by the way, although we may have a default setting, sometimes we can shift. They can overlap even. It really depends on the person, depends on the situation. But fight would be whenever we become confrontational. It's a confrontational reaction. And we're trying to either defend ourselves against whatever the threat is or maybe overpower it somehow. So we're looking at things like yelling, arguing. Sometimes there can be physical aggression. There could be digging our heels in, standing our ground. Sometimes it even is just being assertive. The flight is escape orientated. It's avoidance orientated. And that's the response to the perceived danger, to try to get away from it, to try to avoid it. So that could involve maybe running away, either literally or figuratively. We can avoid particular situations. Sometimes we will distract ourselves with other activities, other little things that are going on to try not to face whatever the immediate threat is. Freeze is when we just become immobilized. Okay, it's like our mind shuts down, even our body shuts down, either to try and assess the threat or to maybe hide from it. Okay, so it's like feeling stuck. Sometimes it's being dissociated. It's like being a rabbit in the headlights. We're unable to act. Sometimes we're frozen, sometimes out of fear, the fawning response. And this is where we try to appease people. We try to please them. We try to placate the person or whatever the threat is. And quite often, when we're looking at this as a long-term thing, we are prioritizing other people's moods, their feelings, or their needs, whatever, above our own. We're looking at people-pleasing behaviors, which could be like over-apologizing, agreeing to anything just to avoid conflict, suppressing our own opinions, our own feelings, just to try to keep the peace. So if you're going to be looking at it as maybe a trauma response, the fawn response often comes from things like relational trauma. It could be childhood neglect. It could be abuse. It could be having been in an abusive relationship or something, where the only way to get through things would be to give the other person what they want, to back down whenever they became aggressive or whatever, or adapting to the other person's moods to try to avoid harm or whatever. So one way or another, it's about giving others what they want, trying to keep them happy, to avoid conflict, to avoid rejection. Now, if this is something we learn in childhood, what we find is in adulthood, quite commonly, that learned response is to appease, to back down, to either vanish, become a bit smaller, whatever. That leads me on to the how do we stop it? How do we address that fawning response, especially if it's so automatic, especially if it's so deeply ingrained, especially if every time someone raises their voice or there's some kind of conflict, what do we do about it? Well, as always, it begins with self-awareness. We have to recognize we're doing it. We also recognize when we're doing it. Sometimes we don't have a problem saying no. There are some people we might feel comfortable enough with. That could maybe be a family member. It could be a friend. It could be somebody in work. It could be anybody. There are exceptions, and it's worth paying attention to the exceptions. So we don't just recognize when we're doing it, who we're doing it with. Recognize those times when it feels okay for us to say no. The times when we're saying yes, sometimes there can be a belief other people, their needs are much more important. If I upset them by saying no, they will reject me, they will punish me, they will do whatever. So when we're building on our awareness and we're recognizing the different times when we do it, sometimes it's worth trying to reappraise the threat. What is the actual threat? Is it maybe rejection? Is it maybe punishment? Is it this person isn't going to listen to me and they're just going to keep on talking until I back down and give them what they want? I often think it's like that salesperson who doesn't matter how many times you tell them you're not interested, you can't afford it, you don't even want it, they just keep on going. They're not listening to the damn word you say. You end up buying the damn thing. You don't even want it. So it's worth paying attention to reappraise the actual threat. Are you going to disappoint someone? Well, you might, but to the best of my knowledge, and people can correct me, to the best of my knowledge, disappointment isn't fatal. People generally get over it. Are you going to upset them? Well, maybe you will, but it isn't something you've set out to do deliberately. Are they going to reject you for saying no? If they're going to reject you, what's the nature of that relationship? If you say no to doing your actual job in work, maybe then that's something different. But if you say no to taking on other people's work as well, if you say no to letting people borrow money that never pay you back, maybe we're looking at something different there. So start paying attention to the times when you are fawning, the times when you're saying yes, whenever you really mean no, and you're aware that you really want to say no. Pay attention as well to when you start changing your behavior to match maybe someone else's energy. For instance, they start to become overly assertive, maybe even aggressive, and you start to back down. Again, when it goes back to reappraising the threat, this is something maybe you could do with journaling or whatever. You could ask yourself questions like, what would really happen if I don't please them? What's the worst thing that could possibly happen? But then ask yourself, what's the worst thing that's most likely to happen? What you often find is there's a huge gulf between the two. Sometimes the belief can be whoever it is we're dealing with, they are much more powerful than I am. They could be a manager in work, but it could even just be a friend. It could be a parent. It could be the next door neighbor. It could be the partner. It could be anybody. If there is a fear that that person is much more powerful, yeah, if you're looking at maybe a person in work who's at a higher level, a senior level, yeah, there's going to be a power balance. But recognizing most situations and most relationships have a power balance. It's normal, it's natural. It's where we meet narcissistic people when it becomes more like a power struggle, okay? But most relationships, there is some kind of a power balance. That being said, when it comes to an individual level, something not a lot of people talk about, but something I believe, it doesn't matter who the person is. Doesn't matter what size they are, how much money they've got, how many friends they have, how many likes they have on social media. There is nobody on a personal individual level, there is no one who is more powerful than you are. The caveat being, you're not more powerful than them. We all have the same. Okay, we all have our thoughts, our ideas, our opinions, our beliefs, our feelings, and all the rest of it. We all have our rights and so on. So that's something worth bearing in mind when we're asking ourselves things like, what is really going to happen if I don't give them what they want? And every time we suppress what's really going on with us, every time we swallow our own opinion, every time we're saying yes instead of no, these little things can chip away at our sense of self. And over a long period of time, it's like we've forgotten who we are. We're not sure what we actually need or even what we believe anymore. What you can do, if you say yes and afterwards you're thinking, maybe I should have said no, it's perfectly okay to give yourself permission to change your mind. It's perfectly okay. You could talk to that person. You know what it is? I was thinking that over. Actually, that doesn't suit me, or I wouldn't have the time, or I don't actually feel comfortable with what you're asking. Whatever it is, give yourself permission to change your mind. And that can go the other way. Actually, I was thinking that over, and maybe I would have time to help you out. You can do that. This is what it is to be autonomous. Give people permission to be disappointed. That's not something you have inflicted on them. It's not necessarily something you've done deliberately. It's perfectly all right. People might be disappointed. It wasn't the answer they wanted. When you're people pleasing, A lot of time it can be fear of things like rejection. Look at the people who you keep saying yes to. Are they really the type of people that you want to be accepted by? Okay, now I don't know that I could be talking to anyone here, so I don't know what situations you're in. If they are good, decent people, well, they're probably going to be okay with your no. They're probably not going to have that big a deal with it. Okay, if it's someone who's just using you, they're exploiting you, well, do you really want to be their friend? Are they being friendly to you? Said this so many times, but it's something that I believe to be very, very true. When people learn to accept your no, they start to appreciate your yes a lot more.